Many crimes have occurred in the state. Horrific crimes have been committed in colored Colorado, including serial killings, murders, and even cannibalism. Here are 10 horrific crimes committed throughout Colorado. 10. The Watts family murder. On August 13, 2018, Christopher Watts committed the most horrific crime the small town of Frederick, Colorado, had ever seen. His wife, Shanann, had just arrived from the airport that morning, but her friend became concerned when she didn't show up for a doctor's appointment later in the day. She also won't answer any texts or calls from her friend. Concerned, the friend called 911 to conduct a welfare check on Shanann's whereabouts. When police arrived at the Watts home, Christopher was there alone. He proceeded to give police permission to search the home, where they found Shanann's cell phone, her wedding ring, and a wallet containing her car keys. The next day, the police took Christopher to the station for questioning. In an attempt to prove his innocence, he chose to take a lie detector test. The results will shock the entire country. Christopher failed the test and confessed to absolutely everything. He told police he was in a relationship with another woman and recently told Shanann he wanted to break up. However, while arguing with Shanann, Christopher began choking her, eventually killing her. At the time, Shanann was pregnant with her third child. It was later discovered that he had tried to strangle his other 2 daughters but was unsuccessful. Shanann buried him in a shallow grave and pushed his 2 daughters into different oil tanks at a site where he worked, killing both daughters. In all, Christopher Watts murdered his entire family, Shanann and his 2 daughters, who were only 4 and 3 years old. Today, Christopher Watts is serving 5 life sentences plus an additional 48 years for terminating Shanann's pregnancy and another 36 additional years for tampering with a deceased body. 9. Thornton Craigslist killer. Thornton, Colorado, is a suburb about 25 minutes north of Denver. The Thornton area is relatively quiet and is home to many growing families. However, like any area in the United States, there are always some strange and disturbing things going on. One such disturbing thing happened on December 28, 2018 to 19-year-old Natalie Bollinger. Bollinger was reported missing on December 28 by her family and was found dead the next day in the woods off Riverdale Road. Investigators later discovered that Bollinger had previously posted an ad on Craigslist.com, titled, "I want to make it big for myself." After reviewing records on Bollinger's cell phone, a prime suspect was identified as Joseph Lopez, a 23-year-old Domino's worker. Lopez contacted Bollinger through Craigslist and eventually met up with Bollinger that same night. When police questioned him, Lopez changed his story several times. However, it eventually emerged that upon meeting Bollinger, he took her to Riverdale Road and shot her at close range in the back of the head. Bollinger was later found by a female trail runner dead with a lethal amount of heroin in her system. Joseph Lopez is currently serving 48 years in prison for the murder of Natalie Bollinger. 8. Colorado cannibal. On February 9, 1874, a man named Alfred Packer, a Colorado wilderness guide, led a trip into the Breckenridge Mountains with 5 other men. The trip was a total of 75 miles, 121 kilometers, in the freezing Colorado winter. While the trip was originally scheduled to last only 14 days, the townspeople were shocked when Packer exited the trip 2 months later. The most stressful question is, where were the other 5 men? When Packer arrived, he spent a sum of money that was very unusual for a wilderness guide, including the purchase of a new horse and saddle, among many other things. Accusations began to mount against Packer as many people saw him around the city with various wallets and equipment. After pressing Packer, he finally admitted the horrific truth. While the men were hiking, they could not find any wild animals to eat. Then the men began to pick each other apart one by one throughout the journey in order to survive. When one of them is killed, the rest eat his remains, and their money is distributed among the group. However, this turned out to be untrue as the men's bodies were found in one campsite. But the story gets even crazier. When Packer was sentenced to death, he escaped from prison for 9 years until he was found in Wyoming. However, when he was found, Packer presented another version of what happened. He told police that one of the men had gone mad during the expedition while Packer had lost his way. When Packer returned, all 4 men were dead except for the one who killed them. Packer then shot the man in the stomach and only resorted to cannibalism after a few days after being unable to find anything to eat on the road. Packer was then tried again and sentenced to 40 years in prison on 5 counts of manslaughter. He died of dementia. 7. An FBI informant turned serial killer. The saga of Scott Hannibal Kimball. Another Colorado mass killer, Scott Lee Kimball, admitted to killing at least 4 people between 2002 and 2004. Kimball had previously been released on bail due to multiple fraud offenses he committed. Willing to assist the FBI, he served as an FBI informant during his killing spree. Each of his 4 victims was last seen with Kimball, which helped lead to his arrest for their murders. However, during the 2 years he was out of prison, Kimball was suspected of killing as many as 21 victims. Kimball is currently serving 70 years in prison. 6. The Coors family murder. The Coors family is perhaps the most successful and famous family in Colorado history. Coors beer is at the center of this family's lineage and has made them wildly successful throughout the Rocky Mountains. However, despite the family's success, they also experienced tragedy. In 1960, Adolph Coors was third in the line of inheritance of the Coors dynasty. However, on his way to work, in Golden, Colorado, Adolph is kidnapped by a man named Joseph Corbett. Corbett was a prison escapee who had previously been convicted of murder in California. He later demanded a ransom of $500,000 for the return of Adolph Coors III. However, months later, Coors' body was found in a Douglas County landfill. Corbett was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he was released on parole in 1980. Corbett later committed suicide in 2009. 5. Hammer killer. In 1984, the city of Aurora was shocked when 3 family members were found murdered in their home. Bruce Bennett, his wife, Deborah, and their 7-year-old daughter, Melissa, were found dead, scattered around their home. Perhaps the most disturbing thing about these murders is the fact that they were brutally murdered using a hammer. The only survivor was the family's 3-year-old daughter, who was also attacked with a hammer. A man named Alex Ewing was responsible for the deaths of the family members. However, Ewing did not face trial for this crime for nearly 40 years. It also emerged that he went on a 12-day rampage across the state, committing rapes, assaults, and even murdering a woman named Patricia Smith. This crime would also remain unsolved for decades. After a crime wave in Colorado, Ewing was arrested in Nevada after assaulting a couple with an axe handle. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for this crime. Then, in 2018, DNA evidence came to light linking Ewing to the Bennett and Smith family murders. Convictions in 2021 and 2022 found Ewing guilty of the 4 murders, and he was sentenced to 4 life sentences. 4. Ted Bundy. Colorado's connection to notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. The fact that not many people know is that one of the most notorious killers in American history, Ted Bundy, also had ties to the Colorado murders. Of his 20 confirmed victims, 3 murders occurred in Colorado. During his time in Colorado, in 1975, Bundy was tried for kidnapping in a Glenwood Springs courthouse. The judge allowed him to use the courtroom library where Bundy actually escaped through a second-floor window. 8 days after his arrest, he again escaped from prison in 1977, where he continued to commit more murders across the country before being caught. 3. Vincent Groves. Another serial killer from Colorado, Vincent Groves, killed up to 17 people in the Denver metropolitan area. Through strangulation, Groves was on a killing spree from 1979 to 1990. By exploiting prostitutes, Groves managed to remain largely undetected, although he spent time in and out of prison in these years. His first sentence was in 1982 on charges of second-degree murder of a 17-year-old girl. He was then released on parole in 1988, where he continued to kill more girls and vulnerable women. In 1990, Groves was finally sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a 19-year-old girl, and an additional 20 years for the unintentional killing of another woman. Groves died in 1996 without providing any details about his heinous crimes. 2. William Neal, Denver axe murderer. In 1998, a man named William Neal confessed to torturing and killing 3 women. He brought these women, with whom he allegedly had affairs, to a house in Denver, claiming he had a surprise for them. In total, 4 women were at the crime scene. When they arrived at the house, Neal hit 2 of the women with an axe and left them for dead. The 4th woman who was kidnapped was tied to the bed next to the bodies, raped, and forced to watch Neal slaughter the 3rd girl with an axe. Neal later confessed to a TV presenter and later to the police. Neal was sentenced to death in 1999, but the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment in 2003. 1. Richard Paul White. In November 2003, a man named Richard Paul White was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences plus 144 years in prison. Richard Paul White admitted to killing 6 victims, 5 women and 1 man, by drugging, raping and eventually strangling them. At his home in Denver, 2 victims were found buried in his backyard. Like many others on this list, White usually targets prostitutes to carry out his crimes. The only thing that wasn't was the shooting of his friend Jason Reichart. Unlike the others, Reichart was shot in the head by White. Reichart was also found in the house in the upstairs room, shot in the head. At the end of the video, don't forget to subscribe and like so we can continue with more. If you have any comment, feel free to write it. See you in a new video. I wish you well.